Our story begins not in the cold north, but under the burning sun of the Holy Land. The year is 1190. The Third Crusade rages at the walls of Acre, that ancient city by the Mediterranean Sea. As Dante would later write, "Through me the way into the suffering city, through me the way to the eternal pain." And Acre, in those days, was indeed a city of suffering. For 2 years, Christian armies have besieged the city. Disease runs rampant through the camps. Men die not only from Saracen arrows, but from fever, from infection, from despair. The hospitals overflow. The wounded cry out in the night, and often no one comes. But on the edge of this battlefield, something unexpected was taking shape. A group of German merchants, practical men from Bremen and Lübeck, men who knew the weight of coin and the price of goods, looked upon the dying soldiers and felt something stir in their hearts. Compassion, perhaps, or duty, or maybe just the simple human inability to walk past suffering without acting. They took down the sails from their ships and stretched them between poles to create makeshift tents. They gathered the German wounded, those who spoke their language, who called for their mothers in words they could understand. They washed wounds. They offered water. They sat with the dying. It was a small act, a temporary charity. No one imagined it would become an empire. But history turns on small moments. A sail becomes a tent becomes a hospital becomes an order, and an order, well, an order can become a kingdom. In 1198, 8 years after that first hospital tent, the Order of Brothers of the German House of St. Mary in Jerusalem was officially recognized as a military order. They adopted the white mantle of purity, marked with a stark black cross, the color of martyrdom, of sacrifice, of death itself. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke would write, centuries later, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage." But what the Teutonic Knights would discover is that sometimes, when you slay dragons, you become one yourself. The first Grand Master was Heinrich Wolpott von Bassenheim, a name now lost to most, but in 1198, he was the beginning of a story that would stretch across centuries. Like the Templars and the Hospitallers before them, the Teutonic Knights took 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. But there was a difference. To join the inner circle of knighthood, you had to be of German noble blood. This was not just a religious order. It was a Germanic order. And that distinction would shape everything that followed. In the Holy Land, they fought alongside the other orders. They held castles. They participated in campaigns. But they were always the youngest brother, the latecomer to a game already in play. The Templars had their mystique. The Hospitallers had their hospitals and their island strongholds. What did the Teutonic Knights have? Ambition. And soon, opportunity. But every empire needs a frontier. Every crusade needs a cause. And in the cold forests of the north, far from the deserts of Jerusalem, a new kind of holy war was waiting to be waged. As the old saying goes, when one door closes, another opens. And sometimes, that door leads somewhere far darker than anyone imagined. The call of the north. Let us travel north. North from the sun-baked stones of Jerusalem, across the Mediterranean, through the German lands, past the last Christian settlements, into a realm of endless forest and ancient gods. This is Prussia. The year is 1226. The great Polish chronicler Jan Długosz would later describe these lands, a wilderness so vast that a man could walk for weeks and never see the sky, for the trees grew so thick that their branches wove a canopy of eternal twilight. The Prussians who lived here were not like other Europeans. They had never heard the word of Christ. They worshipped the thunder god, Pacunus. They held sacred groves where priests performed rituals by firelight. They believed that rivers had spirits, that forests had souls, that amber, that golden resin washing up on Baltic shores, was the tears of the goddess Jūratė weeping for her mortal lover. It was an old world, a world that, in the eyes of Christian Europe, could not be allowed to continue. In 1226, Duke Conrad of Masovia sent a letter to the Teutonic Knights. His lands bordered Prussia, and the pagan tribes raided his territory with impunity. He needed help. He offered them a deal. Come north, subdue the Prussians, and you may keep whatever lands you conquer. It was an extraordinary offer. Not just permission to fight, but permission to build, to rule, to create something entirely their own. But Grand Master Hermann von Salza was cautious. He had seen what happened when military orders acted without clear authority. So he sought guarantees. From the Pope, he received a papal bull declaring this a holy crusade. From Emperor Frederick II, he received the Golden Bull of Rimini, granting the order imperial protection and sovereignty over any lands they conquered. Think about that for a moment. A religious order, sworn to poverty, was being given permission to become a state. Not to serve a king, but to be the king. As Shakespeare would write, centuries later, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have greatness thrust upon them. The Teutonic Knights were about to achieve a greatness that would haunt them forever. In 1230, the first contingent of knights crossed into Prussia. They built their first fortress, Thorn, which we now call Thoren. Then another, and another. Each castle was a statement. We are here, we are staying, and we are not leaving until every pagan god is dead. The conquest of Prussia would take 50 years. 50 years of war in the forests, of burning villages, of forced conversions. The Teutonic Knights would fight with a ruthless efficiency. When a Prussian tribe rebelled, the response was systematic. Villages razed, leaders executed, populations relocated. The medieval chronicler Peter von Duisburg wrote, "The order advanced like the hand of God, separating the light from the darkness." But whose hand was it really? And what kind of light burns so hot that it leaves only ashes? The Prussians fought back, of course. They knew their forests, knew every path and hiding place. They would ambush supply columns, disappear into the wilderness, strike when least expected. For decades, the outcome was uncertain. But the Knights had something the Prussians didn't: an endless supply of reinforcements. Every year, nobles from across Europe would come north to join the Resen, the campaigns against the pagans. It was considered a holy duty, a chivalric adventure. You could earn glory, prove your courage, and save your soul, all in one season of fighting. And slowly, inexorably, the Prussian tribes fell. The Pomeranians, the Warmians, the Natangians. One by one, their sacred groves were cut down. Their priests were killed or converted. Their children were taken and raised as Christians. By 1283, the conquest was complete. The land called Prussia belonged to the Teutonic Order. But the people called Prussians. They were disappearing, absorbed into the tide of German settlers, their language fading, their gods forgotten. The medieval poet Valdera von der Vogelweide wrote, "I sat upon a stone, and crossed my legs, and rested my elbow on my knee, and held my chin and one cheek in my hand, and pondered deeply how one should live in this world." Did the knights ever sit upon a stone and ponder what they had done? Did they ask themselves if conquest in God's name was still godly? Or had the white mantles already been stained too deeply to ever be clean again? The Iron Realm. Imagine, if you will, a kingdom unlike any other in medieval Europe. A realm with no hereditary king, no dynasty, no royal bloodline. Instead, a state ruled by warrior monks, by men who had sworn oaths of poverty while governing one of the richest territories in the north. This was the Ordensstaat, the state of the order. This was the Teutonic realm. And at its heart, rising from the banks of the Nogat River, stood Marienburg, Mary's castle, the greatest fortress in medieval Europe. Construction began in 1274, and it would continue for half a century. Red brick by red brick, tower by tower, hall by hall. When it was finally complete, it was more than a castle. It was a cathedral of power, a monastery of war, a palace of prayer. All three in one. The German writer E.T.A. Hoffmann, who visited the castle ruins centuries later, wrote, "These walls seem to have grown from the earth itself, as if the stones had always been here, waiting for human hands to arrange them into this shape of power and prayer." Let me paint you a picture with words, since you cannot see it with your eyes. Close your eyes. Imagine you are standing at the base of the castle. Look up. The walls rise 40 feet above you. Brick the color of dried blood in the afternoon sun. Towers puncture the sky at each corner. The main gate is open, but an iron portcullis hangs above it like suspended judgment, ready to crash down at a moment's notice. You pass through the gate. The sound changes immediately. Your footsteps echo off stone, and the outside world seems suddenly far away. You are in the outer bailey now, where servants and craftsmen work. The smell of bread from the bakery, the ring of hammer on anvil from the smithy, the low murmur of prayers from the chapel. But keep walking, through another gate, into the inner bailey. Here, the buildings grow grander. The Grand Master's palace rises 3 stories high, its Gothic windows like eyes watching everything. The chapter house, where the knights gather to make decisions. The refectory, where they eat in silence while scripture is read aloud. And there, can you hear it? The sound of bells. They ring 7 times a day, calling the knights to prayer. Matins in the darkness before dawn. Lauds as the sun rises. Prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and finally compline as night falls. This was the rhythm of life in the Ordensstadt. Prayer and war, war and prayer. The sword in one hand, the rosary in the other. But let me take you to my favorite room in the castle, the scriptorium. A small chamber in one of the towers, away from the noise. Here, young monks sit at wooden desks, copying manuscripts by candlelight. The scratch of quill on parchment. The occasional cough breaking the silence. Outside, warriors train for battle. In here, scholars preserve knowledge. Both are warriors in their own way, fighting against the darkness of ignorance. And in this scriptorium, there is a story that was never written in the official chronicles, because it was too small, too human, too forbidden. There was once a young knight, let us call him Brother Friedrich. He was 23 years old, had taken his vows at 18, and spent his days copying theological texts and legal documents. His hand was steady, his Latin impeccable, his devotion unquestioned. Every morning, a girl would bring bread from the castle bakery to the scriptorium. She was the daughter of a German merchant who supplied grain to the order. Her name was Anna, though Brother Friedrich would never dare to speak it aloud. At first, he barely noticed her. But one winter morning, as she set down the basket of bread, a gust of wind from the tower window blew his parchment to the floor. She picked it up, looked at his careful script, and smiled. Just for a moment. Then she was gone. After that, Friedrich found himself waiting for those brief moments each morning. The soft sound of her footsteps on stone. The way she would pause, just slightly, as if she too wanted to say something but couldn't. The warmth of the fresh bread that somehow seemed to carry a message he couldn't read. He began to draw in the margins of his manuscripts, not the usual religious illuminations, but small, forbidden things. A profile, a hand holding bread, a strand of hair catching morning light. He would erase them before anyone could see, but for those brief moments, they existed. One day, she left something beneath the breadbasket. A small piece of amber, golden and clear, with a tiny flower preserved inside, sealed for eternity in that golden tear of ancient trees. Friedrich held it up to the window. The light passed through it, transforming it into liquid gold. Inside, that flower, thousands, perhaps millions of years old, was perfect. Frozen in time. Just as his love would be frozen, never to bloom, never to die. He kept it hidden in his sleeve. A secret. A sin. A treasure worth more than all the official amber in the Order's vaults. 2 weeks later, Friedrich was assigned to a raise into Lithuania. Winter campaign. He never returned. Some said he died in an ambush. Others said he simply disappeared into the forest. The official records note only, Brother Friedrich, scribe, fell in the service of God and the Order. Anna continued to bring bread to the scriptorium for another year. Then she married a merchant's son and moved to Gdansk. She lived a long life, raised children, grew old. But sometimes, on winter mornings, she would look at the amber jewelry in the market and remember a young monk who never spoke to her, who drew her picture in margins he thought no one would see. Did this story really happen? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But in a castle full of men sworn to celibacy, living together for decades, how many such stories must there have been? How many small, silent loves that could never be spoken? How many pieces of amber, or pressed flowers, or folded notes, carried as secret rebellions against the vows they'd sworn? The Order preached that earthly love was a distraction from divine love. But even warrior monks were human. And humans, as we know, have hearts that don't always obey orders. But let us turn now from forbidden love to sanctioned greed. For while individual knights were sworn to poverty, the Order itself was wealthy beyond measure. And the source of much of that wealth was glowing, golden, and washed up on beaches every day. Amber. To understand the Teutonic Order's power, you must understand amber, Baltic gold, the tears of the gods, fossilized tree resin that had been forming for 50 million years, long before humans walked the earth, long before any god had been named or any prayer spoken. The ancient Greeks called it electron because when you rubbed it, it could attract small objects, the first discovery of static electricity. The Romans prized it so highly that a small amber figurine could cost more than a living slave. And in medieval Europe, it was believed to have magical and medicinal properties. The Baltic coast produced the finest amber in the world. After storms, the beaches would be littered with it. Golden pieces, some as large as a fist, washed up from the depths where ancient forests had been submerged millions of years ago. For centuries, the Prussian tribes had gathered this amber. They used it in their pagan rituals, believing it held the power of the sun. They traded it south, following ancient routes that stretched to Rome and Constantinople. The legendary Amber Road was older than Christianity, older than the Roman Empire. When the Teutonic Knights conquered Prussia, they immediately recognized the value of amber. And they did something remarkable and ruthless. They declared a monopoly. In 1264, the Order issued a decree: all amber found in Prussia belonged to the Order. Anyone who collected amber without permission was a thief. Anyone who tried to sell it independently was a smuggler. The punishment for amber poaching could be death. Imagine that. The order, sworn to poverty, claiming ownership of every golden piece that washed up on a beach. The order, preaching humility, executing peasants for picking up stones on the seashore. But from the order's perspective, this made perfect sense. Amber was strategic wealth. It was lightweight, easy to transport, universally desired, and almost impossible to counterfeit. It was medieval cryptocurrency. The order established official amber collectors, licensed men who would walk the beaches after every storm. They established workshops in Gdansk and Königsberg where artisans would carve the amber into rosaries, jewelry, decorative objects. They established trade routes and warehouses. They set prices. They controlled every step from beach to buyer. The best pieces went to very specific buyers. Amber rosaries for the Pope. What better way to curry favor in Rome? Amber chess sets for German princes. Amber-handled daggers for kings. Elaborate amber rooms and altarpieces for cathedrals. Each piece was a statement. The Teutonic Order is wealthy, powerful, and connected. The amber trade made the order one of the richest institutions in medieval Europe. Ships bearing the Black Cross flag sailed from Baltic ports loaded with amber, and returned loaded with silver, spices, cloth, wine, everything the order needed to maintain its realm. In Lübeck, in Bruges, in London, in Venice, merchants knew the Teutonic amber seal. It was a guarantee of quality, and the order's agents negotiated not just as merchants, but as representatives of a sovereign state. But there's something poetic, something almost tragic, about amber as the source of their wealth. Amber is ancient life, preserved. A mosquito frozen in the moment it landed on tree sap. A leaf that fell in a forest that no longer exists. A world that died, but left its tears behind. The Teutonic Order was like that amber. They tried to preserve a moment, the crusading spirit, the ideal of warrior monks, the dream of a Christian empire in the north. They built their castles, enforced their monopolies, controlled their territories, trying to make permanent something that was always meant to be temporary. But just as amber eventually cracks and crumbles when exposed to too much air and light, so too would the order's realm prove fragile. Today, you can still find amber on Baltic beaches. On certain mornings, after certain storms, if you walk the shore at dawn, you might see it, golden pieces glinting in the sand. Children collect it. Artists buy it. Tourists wear it as jewelry. The Teutonic Order is gone. The monopoly is gone. The death penalty for amber poaching is gone. But the amber remains, washing up with the tide, indifferent to empires and orders and the rise and fall of human ambitions. Somewhere on those beaches, perhaps, there is still a piece of amber that once passed through Brother Friedrich's hands. Perhaps it still holds the tiny flower inside. Perhaps it's waiting for someone to find it and wonder about the story it could tell, if stones could speak. But we must return to the castle, to the daily life of the order, to the hierarchy and the rituals that structured this strange realm. The knights themselves lived under monastic rule. They could not marry. They could not own personal property, not even a piece of amber found on a beach. They ate together, prayed together, fought together. The hierarchy was strict: knight brothers at the top, noble-born and proud; priest brothers to handle spiritual matters; serving brothers to do the labor; and below them, the conquered Prussians, the German settlers, the merchants and craftsmen who made the state function. It was a pyramid of power, with the Grand Master at its apex, a warrior monk who ruled like a king but called himself a servant of God. But here's the irony, the contradiction that ate at the heart of this realm. They had vowed poverty, yet they were rich. They had vowed humility, yet they ruled an empire. They preached the word of Christ, yet they had built their kingdom on conquest and blood. They controlled millions of marks worth of amber, yet individually could not own a single piece. The mystic Meister Eckhart, a contemporary of the order, wrote, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." But when the Teutonic knights looked in the mirror, what did they see? Did they see servants of the Lord? Or did they see conquerors wearing the mask of piety? Did they see monks? Or merchants? Warriors? Or hypocrites? On quiet evenings in Marienburg, when the knights walked the walls and looked out over the land they had won, did they feel pride, guilt, peace? Or did they simply feel the weight of the armor, the weight of the vows, the weight of the black cross they wore? Did any of them slip a hand into a pocket and feel a secret piece of amber there? A small rebellion, a tiny piece of beauty held against the rules? We'll never know. But we know this: empires built on contradiction cannot stand forever. The greater the gap between what you preach and what you practice, the more unstable the foundation. And to the east, in the forests of Lithuania, forces were gathering that would test every foundation the order had built. Music CUE. Music becomes contemplative, almost melancholic with minor chords. But empires built on conquest must always find new enemies, new battles, new crusades to justify their existence. And to the east, in the deep forests of Lithuania, the last pagan kingdom in Europe was waiting. The poet Rilke wrote, "Perhaps everything terrible is, in its deepest being, something that needs our love." But the Teutonic knights did not come to Lithuania with love. They came with fire and steel. Wars in the dark forest. To understand what happened next, you must understand Lithuania, the last pagan nation in Europe, unconquered, unconverted, unbowed. While the rest of Europe had embraced Christianity centuries earlier, the Lithuanians still worshipped the old gods. Perkūnas, the thunder god, whose hammer shook the sky. Gemina, the earth goddess. Velnias, the trickster spirit of the underworld. They maintained sacred groves, kept eternal flames burning in temples, and refused to bend the knee to the Christian God. For the Teutonic Order, this was perfect. You see, after the conquest of Prussia was complete, they faced a problem. They were a crusading order without a crusade. Their purpose was to fight pagans, but there were no pagans left in Prussia. The Lithuanians solved this problem beautifully. As long as Lithuania remained pagan, the order could continue to wage holy war, could continue to attract knights from across Europe, could continue to justify their existence. And so began the Resen, the seasonal campaigns into Lithuania. Every year, especially in winter when the rivers and swamps froze solid, the order would organize an expedition. These were not just military campaigns. They were social events, chivalric adventures, the medieval equivalent of a hunting party for the nobility of Europe. English lords would come, French princes, Bohemian counts. Even Henry Bolingbroke, who would later become King Henry IV of England, participated in arrays in 1390 and 1392. It was the fashionable thing to do. Prove your knighthood. Earn glory. Hunt pagans in the frozen forest. The medieval chronicler Jean Froissart described these expeditions with breathless admiration, calling them the greatest adventures in Christendom. But what did these adventures actually look like? Let me paint you another picture. It is January. The forest is buried in snow. A column of knights moves through the trees. Hundreds of men, horses struggling through drifts that come up to their chests. The temperature is so cold that breath freezes in beards, forming masks of ice. Metal armor is so cold it burns to touch without gloves. At night, they make camp. Huge fires are built, and the knights gather around them, eating roasted meat, drinking warm beer or wine, telling stories of their prowess. There is laughter, camaraderie. These men come from different kingdoms, speak different languages, but here, united in crusade, they are brothers. But in the morning, they reach a Lithuanian village. The chronicles don't dwell on this part. They speak of subduing the pagans and bringing light to the darkness. But what does that mean, really? It means the village burns. It means people who don't speak your language, who worship different gods, who have done nothing except be born in the wrong place, are killed or captured. It means children are orphaned. It means the smoke rises into the winter sky, a dark smudge against the white snow. Let me tell you about a knight. We'll call him Hans, though he never existed except in the thousands of men like him who did exist. Hans is 17 when he joins the order, full of faith and fire. He wants to serve God. He wants to be a hero. His first raise into Lithuania changes him. He sees the villages burn and tells himself it's necessary. These are pagans, after all. This is God's work. But at night, in his tent, he hears the screams of the captured Lithuanians being led away in chains, and something in his chest tightens. On his second raise, he kills a man in battle. It happens fast, a moment of chaos, his sword finds flesh, and the man falls. Hans is 20 now, and he realizes that the man he killed was probably his own age, probably had a family, probably thought he was defending his home. By his third raise, Hans has stopped talking about glory. He does his duty. He follows orders. But in the scriptorium, when he copies passages about love and forgiveness, his hand trembles slightly. The Trappist monk Thomas Merton would write, many centuries later, "We are not at peace with others because we are not at peace with ourselves, and we are not at peace with ourselves because we are not at peace with God." Hans begins to wonder if the order is truly at peace with God, or if they are just very good at convincing themselves they are. But Hans is fictional. Let me tell you about something that really happened. The Prussian tribes, the original inhabitants of the land, were systematically destroyed. This is not an exaggeration. By 1400, the Prussian language was dying. By 1500, it was nearly extinct. By 1700, the last speaker of Old Prussian died, and with him died an entire language, an entire way of understanding the world. The name Prussia remained, but it no longer referred to the people who had lived there for thousands of years. It now meant the German state built on their graves. It's a peculiar kind of cultural murder, not just killing people, but erasing them so thoroughly that even their name is stolen and given to their conquerors. Jorge Luis Borges wrote, "Time is the substance I am made of. Time is a river which sweeps me along, but I am the river." But for the old Prussians, time did not sweep them along. It drowned them, and the river flowed on as if they had never existed. The Lithuanian Wars continued for decades. The Lithuanians were fierce warriors, and under leaders like Grand Duke Gediminas and his son Algirdas, they not only defended their land but expanded it, creating the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea. The tide was turning. The hunters were becoming the hunted. And then, in 1385, something happened that changed everything. Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania agreed to marry Queen Jadwiga of Poland. The condition: he would convert to Christianity, and Lithuania would become a Christian nation. In 1386, Jogaila was baptized. He took the Christian name Vladislav. Lithuania, the last pagan nation, accepted the cross. For the Teutonic Order, this was a catastrophe disguised as a triumph. Yes, Lithuania had converted. Wasn't that what they wanted? But it also meant they had lost their reason for existence. How can you wage a crusade against Christians? How can you justify your wars when there are no more pagans to fight? The Polish-Lithuanian Union created another problem. It put the order between two powerful kingdoms that were now one. The hunters had become the prey. Twilight at Grunwald. July 15th, 1410. A Wednesday. The feast day of Saint Swithin, the English saint who, legend says, determines whether the next 40 days will be rainy or fair. At a place called Grunwald in German, Tannenberg in Polish, Zalgiris in Lithuanian, two armies are about to meet. And when the sun sets on this day, the fate of northeastern Europe will be decided. The great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin would later write, "There are two kinds of history, the kind in books and the kind that speaks to us in our blood." For Poland and Lithuania, Grunwald speaks in blood. For the Teutonic Order, it whispers of mortality. Let me set the scene. The morning is hot. The kind of oppressive summer heat that makes armor unbearable, that turns steel into an oven. A huge plain, fields of grain ripening in the sun, surrounded by forest. Two massive armies face each other, perhaps 40,000 men in total, the largest concentration of military force yet seen in medieval Eastern Europe. On one side, the Teutonic Order, led by Grand Master Ulrich von Jungingen, a man in his 40s, a career knight brother who has risen through the ranks. He is a skilled administrator, a capable military leader, and, fatefully, a man who believes absolutely in the righteousness of his cause. With him are the cream of the order, knights in white mantles with black crosses, the finest warriors money and training can produce. They also have allied contingents, mercenaries, vassals, a few hundred knights from across Europe who have come to fight alongside the famous Teutonic Order. On the other side, King Władysław Jagiello of Poland, formerly Grand Duke Jogaila of Lithuania, and his cousin Vytautas, Grand Duke of Lithuania. Their army is a wild mixture: Polish knights in heavy armor, Lithuanian light cavalry who can ride circles around heavy knights, Ruthenian boyars, Tatar horse archers, even a few Czech mercenaries and Russian princes. It's not a unified force in the way the Order's army is. It's a coalition, held together by a common enemy. The two armies have been maneuvering for days, each trying to force the other into disadvantageous ground. Now, finally, they have met. There is no more running. Today, it ends. Before the battle begins, there is a strange ritual. The Order sends two swords to the Polish king, the swords of Grunwald. It's meant as an insult. Here, take these, you'll need them because you're cowards. But Jagiello accepts them calmly and says, "We accept these swords and trust in the help of God." Then, for hours, nothing happens. The armies just wait. It's psychological warfare. The Order expects the Polish-Lithuanian army to attack first, to exhaust themselves charging uphill. But Jagiello doesn't move. He prays. He waits. Finally, around midday, the Order breaks. They can't stand the waiting. Von Jungingen gives the order, attack. The chroniclers describe what happens next with the vocabulary of apocalypse. The earth trembled beneath the hooves of horses. The sky darkened with arrows. The sound was like thunder that never stopped. Let me be honest with you. I will not give you a blow-by-blow account of the battle. This is a story for sleep, not a tactical manual. But I will give you the feeling of it, the shape of it, the terrible beauty that witnesses described. Imagine standing on a hill, watching from a distance. The two armies crash together like waves meeting in a storm. For a moment, they are frozen at the point of impact, and then they begin to churn, to swirl, to merge into a chaotic mass where you can no longer tell which side is which. The dust rises. The summer heat makes it shimmer. Through the haze, you see banners rising and falling, the Black Cross of the Order, the White Eagle of Poland, the Mounted Knight of Lithuania. You hear the sound, God, the sound, metal on metal, screaming horses, men calling out in a dozen languages, prayers and curses mixing in the air. The battle flows back and forth. At one point, the Lithuanian cavalry breaks and flees, and it seems like the Order might win. Von Youngingen must have felt hope in that moment. Victory seemed close. But it's a feint. The Lithuanians regroup and return. And slowly, inexorably, the Polish-Lithuanian forces begin to push forward. Grand Master von Youngingen is in the thick of it, fighting with his knights. He's not the kind of leader who commands from the rear, and that is both his glory and his doom. Late in the afternoon, as the sun begins to sink toward the horizon, von Youngingen's banner falls. At first, no one is sure what happened. Then the word spreads, the Grand Master is dead. When they find his body later, it bristles with arrows and spear wounds. He fought to the end. With him died most of the Order's leadership, the Grand Commander, the Grand Marshal, the commanders of the provincial chapters. The white-mantled elite of the Teutonic Order lay scattered across the field, their mantles soaked red. By evening, it's over. The Teutonic army is shattered. Thousands dead. Hundreds captured. The rest fleeing into the forest. King Vladislav Jagiello stands on the field as the sun sets, as the wounded cry out in the gathering darkness. He orders that the dead of both sides be buried with honor. He finds the body of von Youngingen and has it laid out respectfully. There is no gloating, only exhaustion, only the terrible weight of what has been done. The poet Czesław Miłosz, winner of the Nobel Prize, wrote, "What is poetry which does not save nations or people?" But perhaps the question is, what is victory that brings only more graves to fill? Grunwald did not end the Teutonic Order, but it broke something in them. It broke the myth of invincibility. It broke their momentum. It broke their future. From that day forward, July 15th, 1410, the Order would be in retreat. Not immediately. They still held their castles, still had resources. But the psychological blow was mortal. They had lost not just a battle, but their narrative. They were no longer the unstoppable hand of God. They were just men in white mantles, and men could die. And so the long decline began, not with a sudden collapse, but with the slow erosion of time, the way a river wears down even the hardest stone. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." The Teutonic Knights would spend the next century living forward into a future they did not understand, could not control, and ultimately could not survive. The fading of the white mantles. After Grunwald, the Teutonic Order survived. But survival is not the same as thriving. They negotiated peace with Poland-Lithuania. They paid a massive indemnity. They lost territory, but they kept their core lands, their castles, their state. To outsiders, it might have seemed like they would recover. But inside the order, something had changed. Doubt had crept in. The younger knights looked at their superiors and asked questions they had never dared ask before. If we are doing God's work, why did God allow us to lose? If we are righteous, why did so many righteous men die? There were no good answers. In 1454, a confederation of Prussian cities, the very cities the order had founded and nurtured, rose up in rebellion. They had grown tired of the order's rule, tired of the taxes, tired of being subordinate to warrior monks who seemed more interested in war than trade. This sparked the 13 Years' War, which lasted, as the name suggests, 13 bitter years. It drained the order's treasury, cost them more territory, and ended with the second Peace of Thorn in 1466. The terms were devastating. The order lost Western Prussia, including the city of Gdansk. They lost Marienburg itself, that magnificent castle, the symbol of their power. In 1457, the knights abandoned Marienburg, walking out of the gates for the last time, leaving it in Polish hands. Imagine that moment. The castle that had taken 50 years to build, that had been the heart of their realm, was no longer theirs. They moved their capital to Königsberg, a smaller, less impressive city. It was like a wounded animal retreating to a cave to lick its wounds. And worse, under the treaty, the order became a vassal of the Polish crown. They were no longer independent. They were subordinate. The hunters had become the hunted. The conquerors had become the conquered. Then came the Reformation. In 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Wittenberg, and the religious unity of Western Christianity shattered. The Reformation swept through Germany like wildfire, and it reached the Teutonic Order. The problem was this: the order's entire identity was built on being Catholic warrior monks. But what happens when half of Germany decides that monasticism is unnecessary? That vows of celibacy are unbiblical? That the Pope has no authority? The order began to fracture internally. Some knights remained devoutly Catholic. Others were sympathetic to Luther's ideas. The tension grew. And then, in 1525, something extraordinary happened. The Grand Master himself, Albrecht von Hohenzollern, converted to Lutheranism. It was a betrayal of everything the order stood for, or it was a realistic adaptation to a changing world, depending on your perspective. Albrecht made a deal with the King of Poland. He would dissolve the Teutonic Order in Prussia, secularize its lands, and transform them into the Duchy of Prussia, a secular state. He would be the Duke. The white mantles would be put away forever. The vows would be broken. The order, as it had existed for over 300 years, would cease to be. On April 10, 1525, Albrecht took off his white mantle for the last time. He married. He became Duke Albrecht of Prussia. The Ordenstaat was no more. Try to imagine what that meant for the knights who had dedicated their lives to the order. Everything they had sworn to uphold, poverty, chastity, obedience to the Grand Master, was suddenly declared null and void by the Grand Master himself. Some knights celebrated. Others felt profoundly betrayed. Some left to join what remained of the order in other territories. Others stayed and became ordinary nobles in the new duchy. It was the end of an era. Not with fire and sword, as the Templars had ended, but with a signature on a treaty and the folding up of white mantles into chests where they would gather dust. The Teutonic Order did not completely disappear, however. The branches of the order in the Holy Roman Empire continued to exist. They moved their headquarters first to Mergentheim, then later to Vienna. But they were shadows of what they had been. No longer conquerors, no longer rulers of a state, they became an aristocratic club, a charitable organization, a relic of a bygone age. During the Napoleonic Wars, the order lost most of its remaining lands. In 1809, Napoleon briefly dissolved it entirely. But it was reconstituted in Austria in 1834, this time purely as a religious and charitable organization focused on hospitals and care for the sick. Full circle, in a way. They had started as healers in a field hospital in Acre. After centuries of conquest and empire, they returned to healing. The poet T.S. Eliot wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Perhaps the Teutonic Knights had to travel through centuries of blood and glory to rediscover their original purpose. Not to conquer, but to care. But what of their legacy? What did they leave behind? Prussia itself became the kernel of modern Germany. The efficiency, the militarism, the emphasis on duty and order that characterized Prussian culture, these had roots in the Ordenstaat. When Prussia unified Germany under Bismarck in 1871, some historians looked back and saw the shadow of the Teutonic Knights in the Prussian military machine. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany tried to claim the Teutonic Knights as proto-German heroes, pioneers of living space in the East. After the war, this association made the order's history even more controversial. In Poland, the Teutonic Knights remained symbols of German aggression. In Germany, they became a topic to be approached carefully, if at all. The architectural legacy remains. Marienburg Castle, restored after damage in World War II, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Tourists walk through its halls, climb its towers, stand in the chapter house where decisions were made that shaped nations. The castle is beautiful, there's no denying that. But it is also a monument to conquest, to cultural erasure, to the complexities of history that cannot be reduced to simple narratives of good and evil. The Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, still bear the marks of Teutonic and Livonian conquest. German cultural influence, architectural styles, even family names persist. The cities founded by the order still stand: Gdansk, Kaliningrad, formerly known as Königsberg, birthplace of the philosopher Immanuel Kant; Torun, birthplace of Nicolaus Copernicus. And what of the people who were conquered? The old Prussians are gone, their language dead, their religion forgotten. But the Lithuanians survived, kept their language, maintained their identity, and today have an independent nation. In Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, you can see monuments to Vytautas the Great, the Grand Duke who fought at Grunwald. The Lithuanian national consciousness was forged, in part, in opposition to the Teutonic Knights. History is never simple. The Teutonic Order were not pure villains, nor were they heroes. They were human beings caught in the currents of their time, trying to reconcile faith with power, idealism with pragmatism, divine calling with earthly ambition. Sometimes they succeeded. Often they failed. Always they were complicated. The Austrian philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." The Teutonic Knights expanded the geographical world, bringing new lands into the European sphere. But in doing so, they also contracted other worlds, the world of the Prussians, the world of the Baltic tribes, worlds we can now only glimpse in archaeological fragments and ancient place names. Today, the Teutonic Order still exists. Its headquarters are in Vienna. It runs hospitals, nursing homes, schools. The Grand Master, they still use that title, is a priest who oversees charitable work. There are perhaps 1,000 members, most of them lay associates. They wear no armor. They wage no wars. They simply try to help people. It's a quiet ending for an order that once shook Europe. But perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Teutonic Knights is that all earthly power fades. Castles crumble. Empires fall. White mantles grow yellow with age and turn to dust. But the simple act of caring for the sick, of offering water to the thirsty, of sitting with the dying, that endures. In some ways, the order has come home. And now, dreamer, let us return to where we began, to the shores of the Baltic, where amber still washes up with every tide, to the red brick walls of Marienburg, standing silent in the twilight, to the place where stories become legends, and legends become dreams. The stones remember. If you were to visit Marienburg today, you would find it restored. The damage from wars and time has been repaired. The red bricks glow warm in the afternoon sun. Tour guides lead groups through the halls, explaining the history, showing the artifacts. But if you go in the evening, after the tourists have left, after the gates have closed, You can stand in the courtyard and feel something else. The weight of time. The presence of all those who walked here before. Close your eyes. Listen. Can you hear it? The echo of boots on stone. The distant sound of bells calling to prayer. The whisper of wind through empty halls, carrying with it the voices of men who lived and died believing in something larger than themselves. Marienburg is not just a castle. It's a memory made of stone. A reminder that everything human beings build, every empire, every kingdom, every grand design, is temporary. But while it stands, it speaks. What does it say? Perhaps it says, we were here. We believed. We fought. We failed. We succeeded. We were human. Along the Baltic coast, the amber still comes. Those golden tears of ancient trees, washing up on beaches where children collect them, where artists turn them into jewelry, where they continue their journey from the deep past into an unknowable future. Amber is time made visible. Trapped inside are insects that lived millions of years ago, frozen in a moment that has lasted longer than any empire. The Teutonic Knights controlled the amber trade for centuries, but the amber itself doesn't care. It existed long before them. It will exist long after the last memory of them has faded. There's something humbling about that. Something that puts human ambition in perspective. The great Japanese poet Matsu Basho wrote, "Learn about the pine from the pine, about the bamboo from the bamboo." What can we learn from the Teutonic Knights? Perhaps this, that even the most powerful institutions are fragile. That good intentions can lead to terrible outcomes. That faith and violence are easier to mix than to separate. That history judges harshly, but also with complexity and nuance. And perhaps we learn that redemption is always possible. An order that conquered can become an order that heals. A symbol of war can become a symbol of charity. The human capacity for change, for growth, for returning to better principles, that endures even when empires fall. In the city of Torun, the first castle built by the Teutonic Knights in Prussia, there's a statue of Nicolaus Copernicus, the man who proved that the Earth revolves around the Sun, not the other way around. Born in a city founded by crusading knights, he grew up to change humanity's understanding of the cosmos. There's poetry in that. The knights thought they were the center of a divine drama, spreading God's word at the point of a sword. But a boy born in their city would show that Earth itself is not the center of anything. We are spinning through space on a small planet, temporary creatures with grand delusions. And yet, we matter. Our stories matter. The choices we make matter. The Teutonic Knights mattered, for good and ill. They changed the map of Europe. They destroyed cultures and built cities. They spread both suffering and civilization, often simultaneously. They were contradictions in white mantles. As we all are contradictions, doing our best to navigate the complex moral landscape of existence. The night grows deeper. The stars come out over Marienburg. The same stars that shone on the nights when they walked these walls. The same stars that shone on the Prussians in their sacred groves. The same stars that will shine long after all of us are gone. And in that continuity, there is comfort. History is not just about what was lost. It's also about what connects us across the centuries. Every person who has ever looked up at the night sky and wondered about their place in the universe is joined in that wonder. The Teutonic Knights wondered, too, in their own way. Between the prayers and the battles, in quiet moments, they must have looked up and asked, "What is this all for? What does it mean? Am I doing the right thing?" We don't know what answers they found. Perhaps they found none. Perhaps they found faith. Perhaps they found only more questions. But they asked. And the asking itself is what makes us human. As we close this story, remember that you are part of this continuum. You are connected to the past, even as you create the future. The choices you make, the kindness you show, the courage you muster, these ripple forward in time, just as the choices of those medieval knights ripple down to us. History is not dead. It lives in the stones of old castles, in the words of forgotten languages, in the amber washed up on beaches, and in the stories we tell each other as we drift off to sleep. The writer James Baldwin said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." The Teutonic Knights are part of our past that must be faced, neither glorified nor simply condemned, but understood in all their complexity. And now, the story comes to an end. The castle sleeps. The Baltic waves continue their eternal rhythm against the shore. The forest grows over old battlefields. Time flows on, as it always does, carrying us all toward the same mysterious destination. But tonight, you have traveled back. You have walked with knights in white mantles. You have seen empires rise and fall. You have felt the weight of history and the lightness of time passing. And now, it is time to rest. Let the images fade. Let the distant past recede. Let yourself drift on the current of sleep, knowing that you are safe, that you are here, in this moment, connected to all moments. The Teutonic Knights are gone, but their story remains. And stories, dreamer, are how we make sense of the chaos. Stories are how we find meaning. Stories are how we remember that we are more than just isolated individuals. We are part of something larger, something that stretches back through centuries and forward into futures we cannot imagine. Sleep well. Dream of castles and forests, of amber and starlight, of time's river carrying us all. And when you wake, remember, you too are making history. Every day. Every choice, every kindness. The story continues. With you. Have a sweet dream and good night.